In the shadows of the last century, there are places the maps never marked and names the victors swore never to speak. Somewhere between the smoldering ruins and the paper trails they burned, pieces of the war were hidden, sealed away like a crime scene no jury could bear to see. But silence leaves fingerprints, and the earth has a way of giving back what it's been forced to swallow. At 21:47 hours on February 3, 1945, as the eastern outskirts of Berlin endured relentless Soviet artillery, a column of 6 heavy SS trucks and 2 Kübelwagens departed a storage depot in the Mobit district. The mission's paperwork, what little survives, bears only the code name Eisenveil and the seal of the SS Reich Main Security Office, RSHA. Each vehicle was heavily covered with tarpaulins lashed tight against driving snow. Witnesses later described the trucks as overloaded, riding low on their axles, escorted by armed SS men wearing winter smocks without unit insignia. The convoy moved northwest through Tiergarten, crossed the Havel, and by dawn was seen on the B-96 near Oranienburg, heading toward the Harz Mountains. Civilian accounts, preserved in fragmentary interrogations by U.S. Counterintelligence Corps (CIC) officers, note the absence of standard military markings and the strange metallic knocking noises coming from beneath the tarps. One farmer recalled a smell like burnt copper trailing the trucks. What Eisenveil carried remains speculative. Allied intercepts from the period, declassified under FOIA in the 1980s, indicate that OSS Station Bern had been monitoring unusual SS communications about Category 7 assets being relocated ahead of Soviet advances. Category 7 does not appear in standard Wehrmacht logistical codes. A marginal note in one decoded message reads, "To be secured beyond Allied reach, Directive K." The last confirmed sighting of the convoy came from a Wehrmacht Felgendarmerie checkpoint outside Wernigerode at 1512 on February 4th. After that, the trail vanishes. No wreckage, no abandoned vehicles, no formal record of arrival anywhere in the Harz. U.S. Army intelligence combed the mountain roads in late April after the region's surrender, finding only an abandoned fuel dump containing a single Wehrmacht jerry can with a faint, painted stencil, EISV. Soviet records, partially released in the late 1990s from the Central Archive of the Ministry of Defense, TSAMO, describe the dispatch of a Special Retrieval Detachment 17 into the Harz on February 5, 1945. Their orders, signed by General Serov, instructed the team to intercept specific material of exceptional strategic value, believed to be moving through German-held territory. The detachment reported contact with target column in adverse conditions, but the next 3 pages of their after-action report are missing, replaced with a stamp reading, removed. In 1962, a French Alpine team descending into a flooded mine shaft near Elbingerode recovered a corroded steel lockplate, later identified as part of a military transport crate from the late war period. Analysis showed traces of high-purity tungsten and an alloy consistent with experimental metallurgy from the Peenemünde Research Complex. The item vanished from custody while in transit to a Bundeswehr lab in Bonn. Testimony from Oberstfreiter Hans Kellner, taken in U.S. custody in June 1945 and long overlooked, may be the closest surviving account from someone who interacted with the convoy. Kellner, stationed at a small roadblock outside Blankenburg, recalled being ordered to wave the column through without inspection. He described the SS officer in charge as a tall man with a black eye patch, speaking flawless Russian to his driver. When pressed on what he saw in the vehicles, Kellner hesitated. Under one tarp, the wind lifted the corner. I saw, not crates exactly, more like tanks, cylindrical, with fittings I did not recognize. There was frost on them, even in that snowstorm. Researchers who have attempted to reconstruct the events point to a pattern. The Harz Mountains were riddled with subterranean facilities, WWII, middlework, and lesser-known storage tunnels, some of which were never fully mapped. Many of these were flooded or sealed by the Allies in the post-war years, ostensibly for safety. Files from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers reference unexplained temperature anomalies detected in 2 sealed shafts during surveys in 1948. In 1978, a West German journalist named Otto Brandt received an unmarked envelope containing a photograph of a snowbound truck, matching the Eisenveil convoy's description, parked in front of a rock face. Painted on the cliff wall behind it was a crude sign, Spare Zone, Lebensgefahr, Restricted Area, Danger to Life. Brandt claimed the back of the photograph bore the penciled date, May 2, 45, and the initials AS. He intended to publish an article but died in a house fire later that year. The photograph was never found in his personal effects. Today, the official German War Archives list Operation Eisenveil as insufficiently documented. British National Archives catalogue 2 related files under reference FO 1093/182, both sealed until 2045. The U.S. National Archives hold no record under that codename but do list a convoy of unknown cargo in a classified annex to SHAEF G2's February 1945 operation summary. What lay under those tarps, war loot, experimental weapons, or something else entirely, remains buried under layers of official silence. All that is certain is this: 6 trucks left Berlin that night. None were ever seen again. The Harz swallowed them whole, and with them, a fragment of the war's final, vanishing secrets. On August 17, 1945, barely 3 months after Germany's unconditional surrender, a monitoring station operated by the British WWII service at Beaumanoir Hall, Leicestershire, intercepted an anomalous burst of encrypted traffic. The source triangulated to a location deep in the Sudetenland, within what had been Reich-protected Bohemia. At the time, the area was under joint Soviet and Czechoslovak control. The signal bore German callsign protocols, but the frequency bands were uncharacteristic of any wartime transmitter on record. The message was long enough to suggest technical data rather than routine military chatter. Within 48 hours, similar bursts were detected by OSS Station Salzburg, prompting the opening of a temporary joint decryption project under the codename MK-AURORA. Surviving documents, redacted to near illegibility, list project personnel as including linguists, electronics engineers, and 2 unidentified consultants flown in from Wright Field, Ohio. The consultant's role is unstated, but one memo references familiarity with Piemont Phase 3 output. A rare unredacted line from an August 25 decrypt request reads, "Transmission format consistent with post-war adaptation of Enigma but employing unorthodox rotor configurations, possible double reflector array, not field-issue Wehrmacht equipment." In plainer terms, whoever was sending these signals had both the hardware and expertise to innovate beyond wartime cipher standards, a development considered impossible under occupied conditions. On September 2, 1945, aerial reconnaissance over the suspected source area, an isolated valley north of Teplitsa, revealed industrial buildings with intact roofs, freshly cut vehicle tracks, and no visible human activity. The most striking feature was a line of long, cylindrical objects laid on open-air scaffolding behind one warehouse. Photo interpreters initially classified them as fuel tanks, but an annotation from an RAF materials specialist notes, proportions do not match, surface appears segmented, possibly for magnetic field manipulation or cryogenic containment. When a joint Anglo-American ground team attempted to approach the site on September 7, they were halted by armed Czechoslovak soldiers citing Soviet orders. Soviet liaison officers denied any knowledge of the installation's purpose, claiming it was merely a regional warehouse for surplus munitions. This explanation was contradicted by intercepted Soviet internal traffic a week later, in which General Lieutenant Ivanov warned Moscow that Western forces are seeking Phase 1 material and requested accelerated dismantlement before winter. The last confirmed intercept from the Sudetenland transmitter occurred at 22:03 hours on September 19. The signal ended abruptly, mid-burst. A shortwave listener in Vienna reported hearing a faint carrier tone several minutes later, then silence. In October, British intelligence received a single unlabeled roll of 35mm film via a cutout in Zurich. The images, grainy but clear, show men in plain, unmarked uniforms dismantling large cylindrical assemblies inside the Teplitsa warehouse. None of the men are wearing protective gear, but in one frame, a worker's hand is blurred, as if in motion over a glowing surface. The last frames show the components being loaded into 3 canvas-covered trucks. A handwritten notation on the film canister reads, "Departed east, 0400 hours." All press coverage of the reconnaissance flights and signals monitoring was suppressed under D-Notice 254. A memo from the British Ministry of Supply to the Air Ministry, dated November 12, 1945, states, "Recommend no further aerial or ground penetration of Teplitsa site without prior political clearance. Risk of diplomatic incident outweighs probable technical gain at present." The file was marked Review in 20 years, but was quietly reclassified in 1965. Decades later, in 1974, retired RAF cryptographer Malcolm Rees gave an interview to a BBC researcher for a Cold War signals documentary. In it, he stated, "We cracked enough of one message to know it wasn't a distress call or an inventory. It was an instruction, short, precise. Phase 1 has been transferred beyond reach." 3 days after the interview, Rees issued a formal retraction, claiming he had misremembered details and had been confused by overlapping projects. Internal BBC memos reveal he also requested his name be removed from the credits. Researchers have since noted a curious coincidence. Soviet archives list a train convoy departing Uzhhorod on September 25, 1945 under armed NKVD escort. The cargo manifest, still classified, is labeled in registry as Special Engineering, Category V. The convoy's final recorded destination was Artemis 16, one of the USSR's most restricted scientific facilities. The Teplitsa site itself was demolished in 1948, the ground bulldozed flat and covered with an artificial lake. Local oral history speaks of nighttime truck movements, armed guards, and a hum that came from the valley for weeks before it was flooded. The surviving MK-AURORA files in the British National Archives are stored under piece number DEF24/1127. Most pages are blacked out. In the index, under Disposition of Recovered Material, there is only one line, "Not held on site." See American Custody Record, 9th Air Force, October 1945. No such record has ever been found. On April 14, 1946, the American-flagged merchant vessel SS Darnell departed Antwerp under the declared mission of delivering relief supplies to Montevideo, Uruguay. Her manifest listed foodstuffs, medical kits, and surplus field equipment from U.S. Army depots in Belgium. The voyage appeared routine. The crew consisted of 32 men, mostly U.S. merchant marine veterans from the Atlantic convoys, commanded by Captain Leonard Bryce, a seasoned wartime skipper with no known intelligence ties. The Darnell was last heard from via a standard position report on April 20th, placing her southwest of Ireland in calm seas. 6 days later, on the morning of April 26th, Portuguese naval watch stations in the Azores reported an unidentified vessel adrift 90 nautical miles northeast of Terceira Island. A patrol corvette, the NRP João de Lisboa, was dispatched. Boarding officers confirmed the vessel as the SS Darnell. The ship's engines were cold, her wheelhouse empty, and all lifeboats still secured in their davits. Every cabin and mess room was abandoned, with meals half-eaten and personal effects scattered. The cargo holds were stripped bare. One notable exception was in the forward hold, where officers found a large, scorched logbook lying beside an overturned crate. The book's cover bore a faint stenciled marking, UZATKI U/46, United States Army Transportation Corps, Europe, 1946. Inside, most pages were water-damaged beyond recovery. Only a few legible lines remained, hold number 3 loading complete. Seal verified by CIC. Special container number 7, handle with lead gloves, no exposure beyond 30 seconds. The only other item of interest was in the aft hold. A steel container, approximately 1.8 meters long, welded shut from the inside. Its exterior bore traces of saltwater corrosion but also deep parallel gouges, as if from cutting tools. Portuguese authorities attempted to open the container at Ponta Delgada, but on orders relayed from Lisbon, citing international agreement, it was immediately crated and loaded onto a U.S. Navy destroyer escort that arrived within 48 hours. No official record exists of its subsequent location. Declassified CIA memoranda from 1951, discovered in the late 1990s, reference strategic materials ex-German origin, classified beyond R6, lost in transit, SS Darnell incident. The same file includes an unsigned note, likely removed at sea by third-party retrieval. Possible Soviet trawler Shadow off Biscay 22/4. However, Portuguese maritime logs for that period contain no entries confirming such sightings. Interviews with Terceira fishermen conducted in the 1970s suggest another angle. Several claimed to have seen an unmarked gray ship in the vicinity days before the Darnell's discovery. The vessel, described as low in the water, like it was heavy, reportedly moved without running lights and departed eastward at speed. One fisherman recalled men on deck wearing what he thought were aviator goggles, despite no aircraft being present. Captain Bryce's personal effects, recovered from his cabin, included a folded chart with a penciled route diversion marked between Brest and the Azores, labeled Zone K-17, avoid. No such zone appears in Allied naval charts. The chart was retained by the U.S. Navy and has not resurfaced. An internal U.S. Navy Board of Inquiry convened in June 1946 concluded that the crew of the SS Darnell was removed under unknown circumstances, cargo removed by parties unknown, vessel abandoned in navigable condition. The report recommended no further investigation, citing post-war instability and the lack of jurisdiction in international waters. In 1968, a retired CIC officer named Harold Sturgis gave a closed-door interview to a Senate Oversight Committee on post-war intelligence failures. In the transcript, partially declassified in 2004, he stated, "The Darnell wasn't moving relief goods. She was moving a final sweep of materials we didn't want falling into Soviet hands. You understand, some of the things we pulled from German bunkers weren't weapons, exactly. Not in the traditional sense." When pressed on what was inside the welded container, Sturgis replied, "Let's just say it needed lead shielding, and it wasn't radioactive in the way you'd expect." The SS Darnell was formally struck from the U.S. Merchant Registry on May 3, 1946. That same day, she was scuttled by U.S. Navy demolition crews in deep waters west of the Azores, without public announcement. The official reason given to Lisbon was irreparable hull stress due to prolonged dereliction. No photographs of the scuttling have ever been released. To this day, no trace of the missing crew has been found. Theories range from mutiny to Cold War theft to forced evacuation at sea. The steel container's fate is equally opaque. Its trail ends with the destroyer escort's arrival in Norfolk, Virginia, where its cargo manifest is missing pages. The most enduring mystery, however, remains the handwritten warning in the logbook. 5 words that have never been explained. No exposure beyond 30 seconds. At 2:13 hours on February 14, 1949, during the peak of the Berlin airlift, an unmarked Douglas C-54 Skymaster broke radio silence and requested immediate landing clearance at RAF Gatow. The air traffic officer on duty logged the aircraft's call sign as Able 901, a designation not listed in any Allied flight schedule for that week. Despite the anomaly, clearance was granted due to worsening fog and the standard emergency protocol for unannounced flights. The C-54 touched down without external lights, rolling directly to a far-side dispersal bay normally used for classified freight. Witnesses, later interviewed by British Air Ministry investigators, recalled that within minutes of the engines winding down, a convoy of 3 dark green Bedford trucks pulled alongside the cargo doors. Approximately a dozen U.S. personnel, uniforms stripped of all insignia, began unloading lead-lined crates, each the size of a large coffin. The crates were immediately covered in heavy canvas and secured with steel straps before being driven into the British sector. The entire process took less than 20 minutes. The Skymaster's crew did not disembark except for the pilot, who signed a single-sheet manifest in the presence of an RAF officer. The document was later classified under the code name Angelfall. No copy survives in the open record. The Air Ministry's file entry lists only contents, recovered assets, high security, U.S. custody. East German intelligence archives, opened briefly in 1991 before selective reclosure, contain an intercepted telex from the Soviet Zone Border Service dated the same night. Western aircraft with suspect cargo landed Gatow 0213. Item of priority target classification removed before contact possible. Destination unknown. The telex was addressed to the Ministry for State Security with a hand-scrawled note in the margin. Angelfall equals Leningrad file ref. 33. Verify. For decades, the crate's contents remained pure conjecture. Then, in June 1991, a Swiss art dealer cataloging a deceased client's estate uncovered one of the lead-lined crates in a private underground storage unit near Zurich. The client, identified in probate records as former U.S. Army Major Robert Kane, had no documented connection to the Berlin airlift. Inside the crate were precision-machined components made of a titanium alloy unknown to European metallurgy until the 1960s. The pieces appeared to be part of a larger assembly. Several were engraved with alphanumeric codes in both Latin and Cyrillic script. The dealer contacted the Swiss Federal Police, but before a formal inspection could be arranged, the crate was seized by men claiming to represent the U.S. Embassy. The seizure report filed by local police notes that the men displayed diplomatic identification yet did not sign for the property. 2 weeks later, Major Kane's death was ruled an accident. His car left the road on a mountain pass in good weather. The crash site was cleared within hours, and no photographs survive. Attempts to locate Angelfall related files in UK archives are consistently met with "not held here" responses, even when citing exact reference codes from RAF Gatow's February 1949 air traffic log. The U.S. Air Force Historical Research Agency holds microfilm of Gatow operations for that month, but reel number 12, covering 13 to 15 February, is missing, replaced with a handwritten note, "Withdrawn, C-shape security control." One particularly compelling lead emerged in 2008, when a retired British ground crewman, William "Bill" Hawthorne, agreed to speak on camera for an independent Cold War documentary. Hawthorne recalled touching the side of one crate during the unloading. It was cold. Not cold from the air. Colder, like it had its own chill to it. And heavy, heavier than lead should be for that size. One of the Yanks told me, "Best not to be near it too long." He was serious. Dead serious. In 2014, declassified portions of a West German counterintelligence report revealed that Soviet agents in Berlin were ordered to locate Angelfall items believed to be hidden in the British sector. The report speculates that the cargo originated not from Berlin itself but from an undisclosed location in the Soviet zone, possibly a facility abandoned by German forces in 1945 and later repurposed. A footnote, almost overlooked, reads, "One crate confirmed as having been buried in protective vault, status unknown." The Gatow landing remains absent from all official U.S. airlift tallies. Even the daily press bulletins from Airlift Command, normally meticulous in listing every incoming aircraft, skip over the time slot between 2 o'clock and 2:30 on that date. Only the surviving radar track, found in a forgotten binder in 1973, proves the Skymaster was ever there. To this day, Angelfall is whispered about among archivists and intelligence historians as one of the few documented events from the airlift that refuses to align with the public record. 6 crates were unloaded that night. Only one has surfaced, and then, only briefly, before disappearing once again into the same shadow that delivered it. On the night of March 12, 1953, in a dimly lit backroom of a Vienna cafe, a Soviet military engineer-turned-defector known only by the codename Vostok handed an Mi-6 case officer a small parcel wrapped in waxed cloth. Inside was a single roll of 35mm microfilm. The courier note attached contained just 5 words in block capitals: "The map is not complete." When developed in a secure facility, the film revealed 47 images. Most were poorly lit interiors, bare concrete corridors, rusting machinery, and arched ceilings. A few showed distinctive religious motifs carved into load-bearing pillars. Cross-referencing with wartime aerial photography, analysts identified the structure as lying beneath a partially ruined Benedictine monastery in Bavaria, shelled by U.S. forces in April 1945. What shocked the team were details that did not belong in any ecclesiastical architecture: industrial piping, electrical control panels marked in both German and Cyrillic script, and a massive steel blast door at the base of a stone stairwell. One frame stood out. On a wall-mounted operations map, red pins traced a line from Königsberg through Pomerania, down to Bavaria, and then north toward the Arctic Circle. A notation in Russian beside the Arctic route read, "Transition to Phase 2." The context of this phase was not explained. Mi-6 moved to interrogate Vostok in a safehouse on the city's outskirts. He claimed the monastery had been seized by an NKVD scientific unit in 1946, after locals reported strange noises underground. According to Vostok, the Soviets found an unfinished German research complex already in place, equipped with heavy generators, refrigeration lines, and reinforced vaults. He spoke of devices for separation and pressures no man should endure, but when pressed for specifics, he demurred, saying, "Better you see with your own eyes." Before he could be debriefed further, Vostok vanished from the safehouse within 48 hours. The guard rotation log for that night was later altered. British files on the incident remain sealed under the 30-year rule exemptions, citing continuing operational relevance. However, a single declassified cable from the British Commanders-in-Chief mission to the Soviet forces in Germany, Brixmas, mentions possible dual national engineering project in the American zone, with Soviet-origin equipment unaccounted for. This cable is dated 3 weeks before Vostok's disappearance. In 1958, a Bavarian regional survey team conducting geological stability tests near the monastery recorded unexplained tremors beneath the ruins, localized to an area approximately 40 meters below ground level. Their report noted intermittent metallic resonance accompanying the tremors, as if from large machinery. The following year, the monastery's main remaining structure collapsed during what officials described as a landslide caused by unusual seismic activity. No fatalities occurred, but the site was subsequently sealed with reinforced concrete and fenced under the jurisdiction of the Federal Ministry of Defense. Local oral history, collected in the 1970s by a German folklorist, tells of U.S. trucks arriving at night in 1947, accompanied by engineers who spoke no German and wore no insignia. Villagers recall crates being lowered into the monastery's undercroft and emerging hours later, replaced by covered pallets of unknown contents. Several older residents claimed the work crews carried devices that emitted a constant hum, like a swarm of bees trapped in a jar. In 1992, during brief post-Cold War openness, a retired Soviet metallurgist contacted a German documentary crew with his own account. He claimed to have been sent to the monastery site in 1946 to inventory foreign-origin alloys. Among them was a titanium-vanadium composite that he insisted could not have been produced with the technology available in the late 1940s. It was as if the equipment had come from the future, he told them. 2 weeks after the interview, he died of a sudden heart attack. His family refused to release his papers. Satellite imagery from the early 2000s shows a faint, circular depression in the monastery grounds, approximately 20 meters in diameter, consistent with subsidence over a large subterranean void. Despite requests, Bavarian authorities have declined to allow ground-penetrating radar surveys of the site, citing heritage preservation concerns. The most tantalizing document to surface is a 1954 MI6 inventory list, heavily redacted, labeled "Recovered from Monastery," category red. 6 line items remain unblackened: high-pressure valve assemblies, magnetic coupling rings, thermal shielding plates, cryogenic piping segments, a control console in Cyrillic, and 1 sealed cylinder, dimensions classified. In the margin, a faint pencil note reads, "Do not store at Hanslope." Whatever lay beneath the Bavarian earth appears to have been the product of 2 defeated powers, one Nazi, one Soviet, intersecting in the chaos of post-war Europe. The monastery has been left to crumble under the weight of its own secrecy, guarded not by soldiers, but by the silence of governments that would prefer its history remain buried. Some doors are locked to keep intruders out. Others are locked because what waits behind them should never be seen again. The lines between secrecy and survival blur in the dark, until the truth rots into something unrecognizable. And yet, under layers of dust and lies, the pulse of that truth still beats, waiting for the wrong hands or the right moment to bring it back to life.